"No one marries a fat girl, sir. But I can cook," said the bride. The rancher's reply changed her life. Myra Kess waited at the end of the long hall, where the ceiling lights hummed and flickered like tired stars. The air smelled of disinfectant, dust, and the sharp metal taste of recycled oxygen. Outside, the colony's wind howled across the sand flats, hitting the walls in steady waves. Inside, people whispered anyway, as if the wind could hear them. She held her hands together in front of her, fingers tight, nails pressing into her skin. The dress they gave her was not truly white. Nothing on Frontier Station 9 stayed white for long. It was a pale cream color like old paper. It fit well enough to look proper, but not well enough to make her feel safe in it. She felt too seen, too open. Around her, other candidates stood in a line. Some were young and bright, some were quiet and careful, all of them wearing the same forced calm. The colony called it a bond program. The official flyers used words like stability, partnership, survival. It sounded clean and smart on paper. In real life, it felt like an auction with polite faces. Myra did not look at the crowd too much because the crowd looked back. She heard pieces of conversations drifting like loose wires. "She's the one from the kitchens. Is she really the last pick? Maybe he's desperate. She's bigger than the others." Mara kept her chin steady. She had learned how to do that years ago, back on a crowded transport ship where people fought over floor space and water rations. She had learned to be small in behavior, even if her body could not be small. She had learned to swallow words before they became tears. Tears wasted water. Tears gave people a reason to push harder. A table sat near the center of the hall where colonial officials watched with stiff smiles. They wore clean uniforms and polished boots, trying to look like the frontier was under control. Behind them stood two non-human delegates from the Allied trade houses, tall and thin with smooth gray skin and bright, unblinking eyes. Their faces did not move much, but their gaze moved everywhere. They watched humans like humans watched animals they planned to buy. Myra could feel those alien eyes pass over her body and then move on quickly, as if they did not want to spend time on her. That small moment hurt more than open insults. It said she was not worth noticing. The announcer's voice echoed from a wall speaker. "Candidates will be chosen in order of settlement need. Please remember, this program exists for the strength of the frontier. The frontier does not survive on wishes. The frontier survives on work." Work. Myra understood work. She remembered her mother's hands, cracked and red from scrubbing. She remembered her father's quiet shame when they sold their last family heirloom for medicine that did not help. She remembered the night the recruiter came with a tablet and a promise. A new world, a job, a fresh start. Her parents had signed because people sign when their choices are gone. Her parents did not make it past the second year on Station 9. A lung fever took her mother, and a mining accident took her father. After that, Myra belonged to the colony the way old tools belonged to the workshop. She became a kitchen worker, then a cook. Then, after years of learning what tasted like comfort and what tasted like survival, she became the person people asked for when they were sick or tired or grieving. She knew how to stretch protein paste into something warm. She knew how to make hard-grown root vegetables taste like a home that most people had forgotten. But a cook was still just a cook to the kind of people who sat at official tables. And a woman like her, heavy in a place that praised sharp cheekbones and narrow waists, was always described like a problem. Too much space, too much food, too much body, not enough beauty. The first chooser stepped forward. A young hydroponics manager, nervous and clean, selected a woman with braided hair and careful eyes. The woman smiled in relief and the crowd clapped lightly. Then another, and another. Names were called, pairs formed. People pretended it was romantic, pretended it was kind. The officials smiled wider when cameras turned toward them. Mara's name stayed unspoken. As the line grew shorter, her stomach tightened. She told herself it did not matter. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. She had told herself she would accept whatever role they pushed her into next. Maybe she would be assigned to a distant outpost as a solo worker. Maybe she would return to the kitchens and pretend this day never happened. But her body still reacted as if this was a new pain. Her throat felt hot. Her ears rang softly. At the far side of the hall, a group of frontier men stood apart from the crowd. They wore worn jackets with dust on the seams, and their boots looked like they had crossed half the planet. They were ranchers, the people who kept the colony fed through livestock and imported feedstock. On Station 9, food was not a comfort. Food was power. The one at the front of that group did not look like the others. He was taller, broader, older. His hair was dark with strands of gray, and his face looked like it had been shaped by sun and wind and long days without rest. His name was Dalen Holt. Mara knew of him the way people knew of storms. You did not have to meet a storm to respect it. You just had to see what it did. Holt Ranch sat beyond the colony dome, on the hard outer lands where the air was thinner and the soil had teeth. Everyone said Dalen Holt was stubborn enough to argue with a planet. Everyone said he had saved the colony once by bringing in a herd when the supply ships were late. Everyone also said he did not trust officials, did not trust promises, and did not smile unless the sky was falling. Myra had never spoken to him. She had only cooked for his workers when they came into town. They ate fast, quiet, grateful in the way hungry people are grateful. Dalen Holt watched the choosing with his arms folded. His eyes did not follow the pretty smiles. His eyes followed the small signs of strength. Who stood steady, who listened, who did not pretend. Myra tried not to look at him because looking at someone like that felt dangerous. People like that did not want problems, they did not want burdens, and she had spent too many years being called a burden. More names were called. More pairs left the hall together, escorted by officials who offered handshakes like blessings. Soon, only a few candidates remained. Myra stood among them like an unfinished sentence. The announcer's voice softened slightly. "We have 3 candidates remaining." A silence spread, thick and uncomfortable. Some people in the crowd shifted as if embarrassed. Others leaned forward, eager for the last choices, eager for the small drama. 2 candidates were chosen quickly by men who looked more afraid of being alone than interested in love. Then there was only 1 candidate left. Mara. The announcer cleared his throat. "Candidate Mara Kess remains available for bond placement." Available, like a tool on a shelf. Mara felt the heat rise in her face. Her fingers trembled. She forced them still. The officials at the table exchanged looks. One of them leaned toward the other and whispered. The alien delegates tilted their heads, their eyes shining in a way that felt like cold interest. The crowd's whispers returned. "No one took her. Maybe no one will. What happens if she's left? She'll be assigned. They always assign." Myra's chest felt tight. She had promised herself she would not beg, she would not cry. She would not turn this into a sad story for strangers to enjoy. But the quiet was heavy, and she could not stop the words that rose in her throat like steam from a boiling pot. When the announcer looked at the remaining choosers and asked if anyone wished to select the last candidate, Myra stepped forward on her own. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, but it was clear. "No one marries a fat girl, sir," she said, speaking toward the officials because that was where the power sat. The word fat tasted like iron because it was a word people used to cut. She used it first so no one could throw it at her like a stone. "But I can cook." For a moment the entire hall froze. Some people looked away, ashamed. Some looked pleased, like they had been given a line for their gossip. One of the alien delegates made a quiet clicking sound, amused. Mara stood very still, her hands open at her sides as if she had nothing left to hide. Her heart beat hard enough that she felt it in her fingertips. She expected the officials to answer with polite cruelty. Something like, "That won't be necessary," or "The program is not about skills," or "We will find you placement later." Instead, a different voice spoke. A deep, calm voice that carried without needing speakers. "That's the first honest thing I've heard all day." Mara turned her head, slowly, like she was afraid the sound might break if she moved too fast. Dalen Holt had stepped forward from the ranchers' group. He walked with the steady pace of someone who had decided long ago that the world did not get to push him around. His boots made dull sounds on the floor, each step simple and sure. He stopped a few feet from Myra, not too close, not too far. He looked at her face, not at her body, and that alone felt like a strange kind of kindness. The room held its breath. One of the officials forced a smile. "Mr. Holt, if you are considering—" "I am," Holt said, cutting him off without raising his voice. "But not for your reasons." The official's smile became stiff. "This is an important process." Holt's eyes flicked toward the table. "Food is important. Storm shelters are important. Water pumps are important. This," he gestured around the hall, "this is paperwork wearing a dress." A few people in the crowd made small sounds, surprised. No one dared laugh out loud. Holt looked back at Myra. You can cook, he said, as if tasting the words for truth. What else can you do? Mara swallowed. Her mouth felt dry. She did not know what he wanted to hear. She did not know if this was pity dressed as strength. She did not know if she could survive being chosen as a joke. But she had survived worse than jokes. I can work, she said. I can learn, I can keep going. Holt nodded once like that was the answer he expected. The alien delegate closest to the table spoke in a smooth, translated voice. Human Holt, your selection is inefficient. Candidate Kess has lower social value and lower health desirability by your own species standards. Mara flinched, but Holt did not. He turned his head toward the alien slowly, like a large animal deciding whether the noise mattered. Your standards, Holt said, get people killed out here. The alien blinked. Explain. Holt lifted a hand and pointed toward the colony wall as if the planet itself was part of his argument. On my ranch, the wind doesn't care about pretty faces. The soil doesn't care about waistlines. Hunger doesn't care about your social value. Out there, the only thing that matters is whether you get up when the day punches you. He looked at Mara again. His voice lowered just a little, but it became warmer, more human. And someone who feeds people, someone who can turn scraps into strength, that's not a burden. Mara's eyes stung. She forced herself not to cry, not yet. The officials shifted, uncomfortable. One of them tried to regain control. Mr. Holt, the bond program includes shared housing and responsibilities. Your ranch is outside the dome. It is dangerous. Holt shrugged. Good, the dome makes people soft. A few ranchers behind him grinned. The official pressed again. You understand that if you bond with candidate Kess, you will be responsible for her care and safety. Holt's gaze sharpened. She isn't a child. Then he turned fully toward Mara, and for the first time the hall felt like it was no longer watching an auction. It felt like it was watching a decision that mattered. He asked, do you want to come to the ranch? Mara's mind spun. Want. The word was almost unfamiliar. People told her what she would do. They rarely asked what she wanted. She looked at him, searching for the trick. She found none. His face was hard in the way stone is hard, but his eyes were not cruel. They were tired, yes. They were guarded, but they were honest. Behind Holt, his workers watched with quiet interest. None of them laughed, none of them smirked. They looked at Mara like they were measuring whether she would fit into their world, not whether she would look good in it. Mara took a slow breath. The fear was still there, heavy and sharp, but something else rose beside it. A thin, bright thread of hope that she hated to touch because hope could snap so easily. I don't want charity, she said. Holt's mouth twitched slightly, almost a smile. Good, I don't give it. That made a nervous ripple move through the crowd. Mara's voice steadied. If I come, I work, I earn my place, I don't want anyone to carry me. Holt nodded once. Then you'll do fine. The official lifted his hands as if surrendering. Very well, Mr. Holt, do you confirm your selection of candidate Mara Kess for bond placement? Holt did not look at the official when he answered. He kept his eyes on Mara. I do, he said. A soft sound moved through the room, surprise, confusion, a little awe, and plenty of judgment. Mara felt all of it like pressure on her skin. But for the first time, the pressure did not crush her. It was just noise. The announcer, sounding slightly shaken, declared, bond confirmed, candidate Mara Kess is assigned to Ranch Settlement Holt Sector. Assigned. The word still sounded cold, but Mara held onto what Holt had asked her, the word that mattered more. Do you want to come? Holt extended his hand. His hand was large, scarred, and rough, the hand of someone who built a life with it. He did not grab her. He waited. Mara looked at his hand. Then she placed her own in it. His grip was firm but careful, not gentle like glass, not crushing like control, just steady. He said quietly, so only she could hear, you shouldn't talk about yourself like that. Mara blinked. Like what? Like you're already defeated, he said. She did not know what to say. She had lived her whole life preparing for defeat because it hurt less than expecting kindness. Holt released her hand and picked up a small data slate from a nearby official's tray without asking permission. He scanned it fast, then handed it back. We leave now, he said. The official stammered, now, there are procedures, housing arrangements. Holt turned his head slightly, his voice flat. If you keep her here overnight, you'll put her back in the mouths of people who like to chew. I'm not doing that. The crowd shifted. Mara felt the truth of his words like a hand on her shoulder. If she stayed, she would hear more whispers, more laughter, more pity. Holt stepped toward the hall doors. His ranchers moved with him like a small storm. He did not look back to see if she followed. He did not need to, he had asked. She had answered. Myra walked after him, her legs trembling but moving. As they passed the alien delegates, one of them spoke softly, more to the room than to Holt. An inefficient choice? Holt did not stop. He only spoke over his shoulder. Humans survived on inefficient choices. That's why we're still here. The doors opened and cold air rushed in. It smelled like sand and electricity. Mara's dress fluttered around her legs. The sky outside was a hard gray, and the wind pulled at everything, demanding strength. Holt paused just outside, shielding his eyes, looking toward the transport trucks waiting beyond the dome gate. Then he glanced at Mara. "You ever ride out past the dome?" he asked. Myra swallowed. "No, sir." He nodded like that was fine. "You'll want a jacket." One of his workers tossed her a thick coat. Myra caught it clumsily, then pulled it on. It was heavy and smelled like oil and sun and work. She liked that smell more than the clean, fake scent of the hall. They walked toward the trucks. Behind them, the hall noise faded. The whispers became distant, like insects trapped behind glass. The world ahead was loud and real, full of danger and honest labor. Mara climbed into the passenger seat of Holt's truck, hands gripping the edge as the engine growled to life. Through the window, she saw the colony dome shining behind them like a bubble, fragile and bright. Holt drove without rushing, steering toward the gate that led into the open lands. He did not speak for a few minutes. The silence was not awkward. It was the silence of someone who saved his words for what mattered. Myra stared forward, heart still beating too fast, her mind full of fear and questions. She could not stop one thought from forming, small and stubborn. Maybe this is not the end of her story. Holt glanced at her once, then back to the road. "What do you cook best?" he asked. Myra blinked, surprised by the simple question. Then slowly her mouth lifted into the smallest smile. "Soup," she said. "The kind that makes people feel like they can live another day." Holt's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "Good," he said. "We're going to need that." The truck moved past the last light of the colony dome and into the open land beyond. The road was not really a road, just two long tracks cut into hard sand and stone by years of heavy wheels. The sky above was wide and empty, a pale gray that felt closer than it should be, like a low ceiling. Mara sat stiff in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap under the thick jacket. The fabric felt rough but warm. The engine's low growl filled the space between her and Dalen Holt, and for a while, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind pulled at the truck, throwing sand against the sides in soft, sharp taps. The land looked endless, flat in some places, broken by dark stone in others. Far in the distance, she saw shapes that moved slowly across the horizon. Herds, she guessed. The animals that kept the colony alive. Myra had spent most of her life inside walls and domes. The open sky made her feel small in a way that was both frightening and strange. There was nothing here to hide behind. Holt finally broke the silence. "You ever been this far out before?" he asked, his eyes on the path ahead. "No," Myra said. "I stayed near the kitchens, near the living blocks." He nodded. "Most people do. Out here isn't for comfort." Myra looked down at her hands. "I don't need comfort." Holt glanced at her just for a second. "Everyone does, they just don't always need it the same way." The truck hit a bump and Mara grabbed the door handle. Holt slowed a little after that, not saying anything about it. She noticed. It made her chest feel tight in a good way. They drove for nearly an hour. The air outside grew colder, and the light shifted as thin clouds moved across the sky. The shapes in the distance became clearer. The animals were large, wide-backed creatures with long legs and thick hides, their bodies marked with pale lines that glowed faintly when they moved. They walked in slow groups, heads low, as if the wind itself was something they had to push through. Myra watched them with quiet awe. "They're beautiful," she said without thinking. Holt made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "They're stubborn, like rocks that learned how to walk." The truck turned toward a cluster of buildings that rose from the land like dark, solid shapes. Metal and stone, low and wide, built to fight the wind instead of look pretty. Tall fences stretched around open areas where more of the animals moved, guided by small flying drones that hummed and flashed light signals. This was Holt Ranch. The truck rolled to a stop near the main building. Before Holt could even open his door, it swung open from the outside. A woman stood there, her hair pulled back tight, her face sharp and curious. "That her?" the woman asked, leaning in to look at Mara. Holt raised an eyebrow. "You don't waste time, do you, Ressa?" Ressa grinned. "Life's too short, especially out here." Mara hesitated, then climbed down from the truck. The wind hit her hard, stealing her breath for a moment. Ressa noticed and stepped closer, standing between Mara and the strongest gusts. "You'll get used to it," Ressa said. "Or you'll get blown away. Either way, it won't be boring." Ressa was tall and strong, with arms that looked like they could lift a grown animal. She wore a thick work vest and boots covered in dust. Her eyes were bright, not unkind. "This is Mara," Holt said. "She's staying." Ressa studied Mara's face instead of her body. "You cook," Mara nodded. "Yes." Ressa's smile widened. "Then I already like you." They walked inside the main building. The walls were thick, and the air inside felt warmer and steadier. The space smelled like metal, animal feed, and something fried. A long table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Several workers looked up when Holt entered. That's when Mara felt it, the moment when people decided what she was. Some of them just nodded and went back to what they were doing. Others stared for a second too long. One man, young and thin, whispered something to another, and they both looked away when Holt's gaze snapped toward them. Ressa clapped her hands once. "Listen up. This is Mara. She's here to work, same as the rest of you. If anyone's got a problem with that, you can take it up with the wind outside. It'll care about your opinion just as much as I do." A few people chuckled. The tension in the room eased a little. Mara stood there, unsure of where to put her hands, where to stand, how to exist in this new place. Holt noticed and pointed toward a door at the back. "Kitchen S through there," he said. Her heart jumped. "You have a kitchen?" Holt shrugged. "We eat." She walked through the door and stopped. It was not a grand kitchen. The counters were scratched, the walls stained in places, the shelves crowded with containers and tools. But it was a real space. A place meant for cooking, not just heating packs and pouring paste. There was a stove, a real one. There were pots, knives, a wide sink, and bins of dried food and fresh roots. There was even a small window that looked out over the pens. Myra felt something in her chest loosen, like a knot she had been carrying for years. Ressa leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You okay?" Myra nodded, but her eyes were wet. "I've never had a space like this before." Ressa's voice softened. "Then it's yours now, just don't burn the place down." "I'll try not to," Myra said, and for the first time she laughed. The first meal she cooked on the ranch was simple. Soup, like she had told Holt. She used dried meat strips, hard roots, and a handful of green leaves grown in a small hydro box near the window. She worked quietly, listening to the sounds of the building around her. Boots on metal floors, distant animal calls, wind against walls. When she brought the pot to the table, the workers gathered without being told. They sat, bowls in hand, watching her pour. The young man who had whispered earlier took a bite first. His eyes widened. He took another. "Stars," he said. "That's good," Ressa grinned. "Told you." Holt tasted it last. He did not say anything right away. He took a slow bite, then another. Finally, he nodded once. "This'll keep people standing," he said. Myra felt taller than she had in years. The days that followed were hard. Holt did not let her stay in the kitchen all the time. "You work here, you learn the work," he said, so she went out with the others. She learned how to guide the herds with light signals. She learned how to fix a broken fence in the middle of a sandstorm. She learned how to spot the signs of sickness in the animals before it spread. Her body ached in ways she was not used to. Her hands blistered. Her legs burned. More than once she had to sit down and breathe through the pain. No one laughed. Ressa showed her how to wrap her hands. The young man, whose name was Keel, walked slower when Mara walked slower. Holt watched from a distance, never stepping in unless something was truly dangerous. At night, Mara cooked. Bigger meals, stronger meals, food that filled empty spaces and made tired people smile without meaning to. One evening, a small group of non-human traders arrived. Tall, thin beings with smooth skin and careful movements. They brought news and parts and asked about supplies. They sat at the table and ate Mara's food. One of them tilted its head. "This sustenance produces elevated morale response," it said through its translator. Ressa snorted. "That means they like it." The alien looked at Mara. "You created this?" Mara nodded. The alien studied her in a way that felt different than before, less like measuring weight, more like measuring value. Later that night, Holt stood outside, looking at the sky. Mara stepped out with 2 cups of warm broth. She hesitated, then handed one to him. He took it. "Thanks." They stood in silence, watching the stars break through the clouds. "You don't have to prove anything here," Holt said after a while. Mara hugged her cup. "I don't know how not to." Holt looked at her, really looked. Then prove this instead, prove you belong to yourself, not to what people say you are. Myra did not answer, but the words stayed with her. A week later, the storm came. It started as a low sound in the distance, like a giant breathing. The sky darkened and the wind picked up fast. Ressa ran into the main building. Herds too far out. If they scatter, we lose half of them. Holt was already moving. Get the drones up. Everyone gear on. Myra followed, her heart pounding. The wind was sharp now, full of sand and cold. The animals were restless, their glowing lines bright in the dark. Myra stayed near the supply truck, handing out water packs and wraps. One worker slipped and she grabbed his arm, pulling him back up. Her muscles screamed, but she did not let go. The storm hit like a wall. Wind knocked people sideways. Sand cut its skin and fabric. The drone struggled to stay in the air. Myra saw Keel fall, his leg caught in a loose wire. Without thinking, she ran. She dropped to her knees in the sand, hands working at the wire. The wind tried to tear it from her fingers. Her eyes burned. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. Keel yelled something, but she could not hear it. Then Holt was there, his body blocking the worst of the wind. Together, they freed the wire and dragged Keel to the truck. When it was over, the storm faded as fast as it had come. They stood in the quiet after, covered in dust and sweat and exhaustion. Holt looked at Myra, his face serious. "You could have been hurt." Myra wiped her face. "So could he." Holt studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. That night, as she stirred a pot of thick stew, Myra realized something. No one here had called her a burden. No one here had told her to be smaller. She was tired. She was sore. But she felt solid, like she was finally standing on ground that did not shift under her feet. Outside, the wind howled again, but inside the ranch, the lights stayed on and the soup stayed warm. The days after the storm felt different. The ranch still worked the same way. The animals still needed feeding. The fences still broke. The wind still howled like it wanted to tear the world apart. But something had changed in the way people looked at Myra. They did not look past her anymore. They looked at her when she spoke. They waited for her food at night like it was part of the work, not just something extra. Even the non-human traders who passed through began to ask, "Is the cook here today?" instead of asking for Holt. Myra tried not to think too much about it. Thinking too much made her nervous. She focused on what she could touch, the weight of a pot in her hands, the smell of herbs, the sound of a fence post locking into place. One morning, a message arrived from the colony. A small drone landed near the main building and flashed a red light. Ressa grabbed it and brought it inside. Holt watched as she opened the message. Her face tightened. "They're calling for an emergency meeting," Ressa said. "Trade Council and colony officials." "Something about supply routes," Holt frowned. "That's never good news." Myra stood near the counter, cutting roots for the day's meal. She tried not to listen, but the words hung in the air like smoke. An hour later, a transport ship roared overhead and landed near the ranch. Dust and sand flew in every direction. A group of officials stepped out, clean uniforms already marked by the wind. Two alien delegates followed them, tall and smooth and quiet. They did not look happy. Inside the main building, everyone gathered. The officials stood near the table like they owned the place. One of them, a man with a thin face and sharp eyes, spoke first. "We are facing a major disruption in food transport. 3 outer systems have lost their main supply ships." Ressa crossed her arms. "That sounds like a you problem?" The man did not smile. "It is now a Holt Ranch problem." Myra felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The official continued. "Your ranch produces enough protein and feedstock to support this colony and several nearby stations. We need you to increase output and prepare emergency shipments." Holt leaned back against the wall. "And how do you plan to move it?" The alien delegate stepped forward. "Our fleets are engaged in higher priority operations. We cannot spare ships for human cargo at this time." Ressa snorted. "So you want our food but not our people?" The alien's eyes blinked slowly. "We operate on efficiency." Holt's jaw tightened. "People don't run on efficiency." The thin official raised his hands. "This is not a debate, this is a directive. If you do not comply, the council will review your trade rights and land claims." The room went quiet. Myra felt her heart beat in her ears. She did not understand all the words, but she understood the tone. This was a threat. Holt pushed himself off the wall. "You're asking us to work harder, faster, and risk more while you sit behind desks and decide who deserves to eat." The official met his gaze. "We are asking you to be responsible." Myra stepped forward before she could stop herself. Everyone looked at her. We have food, she said. Her voice shook, but she kept going. We can make more, but people here are already tired, hurt. If you take everything, there won't be anything left for when the next storm comes. The alien delegate turned its head toward her. You are the cook. Mara nodded. Yes, you provide morale sustenance, it said. This is not relevant to trade calculations. Mara clenched her hands. It's relevant to survival. The thin official sighed. This is not your concern. Holt stepped closer to Mara, standing beside her, not in front of her. It is her concern, it's all our concern. The officials exchanged looks. The alien delegate spoke again. We will return in 3 days for your decision. They left as quickly as they had come, their transport lifting off and vanishing into the gray sky. The building felt colder after they were gone. Ressa slammed a hand against the table. They're going to bleed us dry. Keel kicked a chair. We can't keep up that pace. Holt rubbed his face. We won't do it their way. Mara looked at him. Then how? Holt met her eyes. The human way. That night the ranch did not sleep. They gathered around the table. Maps and screens were spread out. Ressa marked fence lines. Keel tracked herd paths. Holt planned shifts. Myra listened. She did not know much about trade or transport, but she knew people. We can't just work harder, she said slowly. We need help, Ressa frowned. From who? The council just told us we're on our own. Mara thought about the traders who had smiled at her food, the station workers who had whispered about the soup that made them feel like they could go another day. From everyone we've fed, she said. Holt looked at her, eyes sharp. Explain. Mara took a breath. People talk. They talk about this place, about the food, about how this ranch helped during storms. If the outer systems are really losing supplies, then they need more than just shipments. They need places that can hold, cook, and share. We can be that place, but not alone. Ressa tilted her head. You're saying we turn this ranch into a hub? Mara nodded. A place where ships can land, rest, and load, where workers can eat and keep going, where humans and non-humans both feel like they matter. Holt was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow and dangerous in a good way. The council wants food, we'll give them a community. The next 3 days were chaos. Messages went out to nearby stations and traders. Small ships arrived, curious at first, then hopeful. Workers from other outposts came to help, bringing tools, parts, and hands. Mara's kitchen became the heart of it all. She cooked from sunrise to long past dark. Soup, stew, flat bread, anything that could be made in large amounts and eaten fast. People sat on the floor, on crates, on the ground outside, sharing bowls and stories. Humans and aliens ate side by side. One alien worker approached her, its voice soft through the translator. Your food reduces fatigue response. Mara smiled. That's what it's supposed to do. The ranch grew louder, brighter, busier. When the council returned, they did not find a struggling ranch. They found a living network. Ships lined the open land. Workers moved in teams. The herds were guided with care, not panic. Food was loaded onto transports, but so were people, tools, and plans. The thin official stared. What is this? Holt stood tall. This is what happens when you don't treat survival like a business. The alien delegate's eyes moved across the scene. This is inefficient. Mara stepped forward again, holding a bowl of soup. She offered it. The alien hesitated, then took it. It drank. Its eyes widened just slightly. This creates a bonding response. Mara nodded. That's called being human. You don't have to be one to feel it. The official cleared his throat. The council will not approve of this level of independence. Holt crossed his arms. They don't have to. We're still sending food. We're just not sending it empty. The official opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around at the workers, the ships, the shared tables. Finally, he said, We will report this. Holt smiled. Good, tell them the frontier is doing just fine. That night, as the ranch quieted, Mara sat outside with Holt. The stars were bright, sharp against the dark sky. You changed things, Holt said. Mara shook her head. We all did. Holt looked at her. You started it. Mara hugged her knees. I just didn't want people to feel alone. Holt nodded. That's how humans win. We don't outgun, we don't outfly, we outcare. Mara laughed softly. That sounds strange. Holt smiled. So are we. In the distance, ships lifted off, carrying food, workers, and stories of a ranch where people mattered more than numbers. Mara watched the lights fade into the stars. For the first time, she felt like she was not just part of a place. She was part of something bigger. The following morning, the ranch was quiet, but not for long. Myra walked through the main hall carrying a tray of hot tea, careful not to spill. Her hand still ached from the past week's work, but she ignored it. The ranch never stopped, and neither could she. Holt was already in the planning room, maps and screens spread across the table. His expression was tight, eyes scanning routes, supply chains, and schedules. The storm had passed, but the damage lingered. The outer systems were counting on them, and failure was not an option. Mara set down the tea. "You need to drink something," she said. Holt did not look at her. "I don't have time." "You have to," Mara insisted, placing the cups in front of him. "Even leaders need strength." Holt finally glanced at her. "You've changed how this place works," he said quietly. Mara frowned. "I just cook." Holt shook his head. "It's more than that, you care. You make people believe they can keep going when the wind is ready to knock them down. That's not cooking, that's survival." She looked away, unsure how to respond. Compliments had never felt real, especially not for her. But this felt different. Holt's words had weight. They were not empty. The doors of the planning room slid open with a hiss. A small convoy of council officials and alien delegates entered. They were dressed in clean uniforms that did not belong here. Their shoes left faint marks in the dust on the floor. Holt stood. "You're early." The thin official from the council, the one who had threatened their land claims, smiled faintly. "We needed to see the results of your emergency operations." Ressa stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "You see them." The officials glanced around the hall. Mara followed their gaze and felt a small pride in her chest. The ranch was alive. Workers moved with purpose, food being prepared, herds being guided. The buildings themselves seemed to hum with life. The council man frowned. "Your output is impressive," he said slowly. "But it is unusual. It does not follow standard protocols." Holt crossed his arms. "Protocols don't feed hungry people. People do." The aliens blinked. One of them spoke. "Your methods are inefficient, yet effective." Holt's eyes narrowed. "Effective is all that matters out here." Mara cleared her throat. "We made a network," she said. "Not just food, places for ships to land, people to rest, and workers to share what they know. Everyone helps each other. That's why it worked." The council members exchanged glances. One of them shook his head, as if he could not believe the simple words of a human cook had made such a difference. Holt stepped closer to Mara, putting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "She started it," he said. "Not me. She made the ranch more than just a place to keep animals alive. She made it a place people want to survive." Mara's heart pounded. She had never heard Holt speak like that before, not in front of anyone. Her cheeks heated. She lowered her eyes, afraid she might smile too widely. The council man cleared his throat. "And you, candidate Kess, are you capable of sustaining this system without direct oversight?" Mara straightened. "Yes, I've learned the land, the herds, and the people. I know how to feed them. I know how to keep them moving. I know how to care when there's nothing left but hope." The hall went silent. Even the aliens seemed to pause. Holt stepped back, letting Mara stand in the center. "She's not exaggerating," he said. "If she says it works, it works." The thin council man exhaled slowly. "We will report this. The council may question the methods, but the results are clear. This is a model for other colonies." Ressa grinned, clapping her hands once. "Told you we could do it." Mara bit her lip. She wanted to smile, but it felt strange to be praised so openly. She had spent her life in kitchens and empty rooms, cooking for people who rarely looked up. Now they were looking at her as if she mattered. The council members left, their transport engines screaming into the sky. The aliens lingered for a moment, then followed, leaving a quiet behind them that was almost comforting. Holt turned toward Mara, his face softer than she had ever seen. "You did it," he said simply. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. "No," Holt said, "but you started it. You made people see what we can do when we care, not just when we follow rules." The sun was low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the ranch. Myra followed Holt outside. The air was cold and the wind picked up, but it no longer felt threatening. It was alive, yes, but so was she. She watched the herds move across the pens, workers adjusting fences, drones guiding animals with precise lights. Everything moved together like a single organism, strong and resilient. "You know," Holt said, standing beside her, "people will start talking about this ranch, about what you did, about how humans work when they have to." Mara looked at him. "And what will they say?" Holt smiled faintly. "They'll say humans are stubborn, they'll say we don't quit. And maybe they'll start to respect that." Mara felt a warmth rise in her chest. Respect was new, praise was new. Even hope felt new, sharp, and bright. She looked out at the horizon. Somewhere far beyond the ranch, colonies waited, systems depended on them. She felt the weight of it, but it did not crush her. Ressa came up behind them. "Storm's coming again," she said, "and this time the outer systems are sending more help. They want to learn what we did." Holt nodded. "Then we teach them, but we teach them the right way." Not the easy way. Mara turned back toward the ranch buildings. She could see workers moving in groups, sharing tasks, feeding animals, cooking meals. Each small movement mattered. Each small choice built something bigger. "You've changed how the council sees humans," Holt said quietly, "but more importantly, you've changed how we see ourselves, and that's more important than anything they can say." Mara swallowed. She had spent so long believing she was just a burden. Too big, too loud, too much. But here she realized something. She had value. Not because she looked a certain way, not because she followed every rule, but because she cared and acted when it mattered. Holt placed a hand on her shoulder again. "And this isn't over. We'll face storms, shortages, and more officials who think humans are inefficient. But now we know what we can do." Mara nodded. "We keep going together." "Yes," Holt agreed, "together." The wind picked up, swirling sand and dust around them. The ranch, the herds, the buildings, the people, everything moved with life and purpose. Mara felt her stomach tighten, but not with fear, with determination, with pride. She knew the council would return. They would question methods, push rules, and try to control outcomes. But Mara also knew this. Nothing would break the network they had built, the spirit they had shared, or the power of people who refused to quit. And as the stars began to pierce the fading light of the sky, Mara allowed herself to smile. Not a small smile, but a wide one full of hope. Holt looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then just slightly he nodded. They did not need to speak. The ranch spoke for them. The herds, the workers, the meals, the lights, all of it moved with purpose, proof that humans could survive, adapt, and thrive. Myra realized something else. She had never been afraid of hard work. She had only been afraid of being invisible. Here she was seen. She was needed. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change everything. Holt broke the silence. "We need to check the outer pens before dark. You coming?" Mara laughed softly. "Of course." Together they walked into the wind, toward the animals, the work, and the unknown challenges ahead. The ranch had survived the storm. Now it would survive the humans who refused to stop. For Mara, that was no longer just about cooking. That was about proving every day that humans could endure, could care, and could make a difference even when the galaxy doubted them. And as the first stars of evening appeared overhead, she knew this was only the beginning. The story of the ranch, the story of humans who refused to quit, and the story of a girl who fed more than just bodies. She knew it would be remembered. Because humanity, she realized, did not survive by being perfect. It survived by being relentless, resourceful, and willing to care when no one else would. The days that followed felt almost unreal. The ranch had grown in ways Mara could never have imagined. Ships came from neighboring colonies, not just for supplies, but for guidance. Workers, both human and alien, had begun to treat Holt Ranch as a hub, a place to rest, to eat, to learn how to survive in a universe that often seemed too large, too harsh, too indifferent. Mara moved through the kitchen early in the morning, her hands deftly chopping, stirring, tasting. The smells of the day ahead filled the air: roasted roots, simmering broth, fresh-baked bread. She glanced at the rows of bowls lined up on the counter, waiting for the workers to arrive. Her heart swelled with a quiet pride. The food she made was more than sustenance. It was hope. Ressa entered, clapping her hands once to get Mara's attention. "Looks like the first wave of shipments is ready," she said. "Outer systems are already sending crews here. They want to see how we manage everything." Mara nodded, a small smile forming. "Then we show them." Holt came in behind them, boots dusted with the gray sand from the pens. He carried a data pad and a worn notebook, his expression as serious as ever. "We have visitors," he said. "We run a tour, but we stick to what matters. Safety first, work second." Mara followed him outside, glancing at the bustling ranch. Drones hovered overhead, guiding the herds through the pens. Workers moved with efficiency, passing crates, checking water supplies, and tending to the animals. Mara realized that she knew every step, every rhythm of this place now. She was not just a cook or a helper. She was part of its heartbeat. The transport ships arrived in steady succession. Mara watched as humans and aliens disembarked, carrying tools, supplies, and curiosity. They looked around with wide eyes, whispering among themselves. Mara recognized that look. It was the same look she had seen on the faces of the council officials when they first arrived after the storm. the look that said, "We did not expect this." Holt approached her, his tall frame cutting a shadow in the morning sun. "You ready for this?" he asked. Myra tightened her apron. "As ready as I'll ever be." The first group of visitors entered the main hall, guided by Holt and Ressa. Myra followed with a tray of steaming bowls. The visitors hesitated, unsure of what to do, until Myra offered the food. "This is what keeps us moving," she said. "Eat, rest, and then see what we've done." Hands reached for the bowls, small murmurs of surprise and delight escaping from alien throats and human voices alike. They tasted the stew, the bread, the roasted roots. Eyes widened. They looked at Myra in a new way, not just as a cook, but as someone who had built something remarkable. One alien delegate, taller than the rest, turned its head toward her, clicking softly in its translator. "You've enhanced morale levels significantly," Myra smiled. "That's the idea." Holt led the visitors outside to see the herds. Myra stayed behind in the kitchen for a moment, cleaning, making sure the next meal would be ready. She paused by the window, looking out at the pens where animals grazed peacefully. Dust swirled in the wind, catching the light like gold. It had not always been this way. She remembered the first night she had arrived at the ranch, how the wind had seemed to push her down, how she had felt small and unwanted. Now she felt strong, needed, alive. Hours passed in a blur. Myra moved from kitchen to hall to supply lines, her hands never still. The visitors followed Holt's lead, learning, helping, asking questions. Myra answered as best as she could, guiding, demonstrating, feeding. Every bowl she handed out, every loaf she baked was a statement. Humans survive, humans endure, humans care. By evening, the visitors had left, impressed and grateful. Holt and Ressa stood outside the main building, watching the transports leave, lights fading into the night sky. "You did well today," Holt said, voice low but carrying weight. Myra shook her head. "We did it." Everyone did. Holt looked at her closely, as if measuring the truth in her words. "You started it," he said finally. "The kitchen, the hub, the way people see this ranch now, it started with you." Myra's stomach tightened. Praise had always been strange for her, but this was different. Holt's words carried no pity, no judgment, only truth. Later that night, Myra sat by the fire outside, the ranch quiet for once. Ressa had gone to check on the herds. Holt was in the planning room with data pads and maps. Myra stirred a small pot of tea, steam rising into the cold night air. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the crowded colony halls where whispers cut sharper than knives, to a kitchen where she had finally felt seen, to a ranch that had become a beacon for survival. She had been called a burden. She had been told she would not matter. And yet here she was. Standing in the glow of firelight, surrounded by life, hope, and purpose. She was part of something bigger than herself. The stars above were sharp against the black sky, distant points of light that reminded her how small the universe could make a person feel. And yet she also saw how much a single human could change it. The next morning, Myra was up before dawn. Holt had asked her to join him in the fields to guide a new herd arrival from a neighboring system. The sun had not yet risen, but the horizon glimmered faintly, a promise of the day ahead. Myra followed Holt through the pens. Animals shifted as they approached, low rumbles echoing from their throats. Myra reached out instinctively, guiding one animal forward, another gently nudged into line. Holt watched silently, nodding in approval. "You've learned fast," he said finally. "I had a good teacher," Myra replied. He smiled faintly, not a full smile, but enough to make her feel warmth. "You taught us too," he said. By mid-morning, workers had begun unloading new supplies. Myra's kitchen was filled with the smell of fresh bread and roasted roots. She moved from station to station, ensuring everyone had something to eat. Ressa shouted instructions across the yard, and Keel carried crates of feed, smiling at Myra when their eyes met. The day passed in a steady rhythm. Myra found herself laughing more than she had in years, the sound startling even to her. Holt's eyes caught hers once, and she saw a flash of pride there, quiet and steady. By evening, the ranch had grown in ways Myra could hardly describe. More workers, more animals, more life. Systems that had once seemed distant and indifferent were now connected through Holt Ranch. Food, tools, knowledge, all moving in a careful, deliberate network. And Myra had been at the center of it all, not because of authority, but because of care, persistence, and the simple act of refusing to be invisible. Holt joined her by the fire again, a mug of tea in hand. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. Myra stared into the flames. I don't know, I just take one day at a time, Holt nodded. That's the right answer. The frontier doesn't wait for plans. It tests you with storms and shortages and winds that don't care. The only way to survive is to adapt. Mara smiled softly. We've adapted. Yes, Holt said, and you showed us all that caring, not rules or numbers, can make the difference. She looked up at the stars, feeling the vastness above. The galaxy was wide, full of unknowns and dangers, but she no longer felt small in it. She felt capable. Important, necessary, weeks passed, and word of Holt Ranch spread. Messages arrived from neighboring colonies asking for guidance. Smaller outposts began emulating the system Mara had helped build, kitchens, herds, and people working together. They called it the human way, a term that made Mara smile privately. One day, a young girl arrived at the ranch with her parents. She stared at Mara with wide eyes. "Are you the one who cooks?" she asked. Mara nodded. "Yes, would you like to help?" The girl's eyes lit up. Mara handed her a small bowl of broth, warm and fragrant. The girl took a sip and nodded, as if Mara's cooking had opened a new world for her. Holt watched from across the yard, leaning against a fence post. Mara caught his gaze, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other, understanding everything without saying it. The ranch had survived storms, council pressure, and doubt. But most importantly, it had survived because humans cared, because they refused to quit. And Mara, the girl who had once been told she would never be chosen, who had only ever claimed one small skill, cooking, had proven that even a single human could change the course of many lives. She walked through the pens, her hands brushing against the backs of the animals, her eyes meeting the workers, human and alien alike. The wind blew around her, but she did not flinch. She had learned how to stand against it. That night, as the stars burned bright and the ranch hummed with life, Mara realized the truth. Humanity was not remembered for ships, weapons, or power. It was remembered for those who cared when the galaxy had stopped noticing, for those who refused to quit, and for those who turned survival into hope. Holt came to stand beside her once more. "We've built something worth telling," he said. Mara looked at the ranch, the people, the animals, the glowing horizon. She nodded. "Yes, and we'll keep building it." And in that quiet, strong moment, Mara knew she had found more than a home or a purpose. She had found the story she belonged to, a story that would ripple across systems, remembered not for her shape or her past, but for her courage, her care, and her unyielding humanity. The wind rose again, sharp and cold, but Mara stood firm. The ranch stood firm. And humanity, through her and those who had refused to quit, stood firm too. The universe had tested them, and they had answered, not with weapons, not with rules, but with heart.